Okay. And so, can you tell me your name and what your role is at the Animal Legal Defense Fund?
Sure. My name is Kathleen Wood, and I'm a senior staff attorney at the Animal Legal Defense Fund. I work in our criminal justice program, which means I work with prosecutors, law enforcement, and legislators throughout the country to enforce and strengthen animal protection laws.
Okay, and can you explain a little bit about what the Animal Legal Defense Fund is in general?
Yeah, the Animal Legal Defense Fund is a national nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting the lives and advancing the interests of animals through the legal system.
Okay. And you guys do some rankings of different states and their legislation around animal protection laws, and Mississippi was ranked 46th in the last one I was able to see. Can you
Yeah.
explain those kind of criteria that goes into what those rankings are?
Sure. Our annual rankings report assesses the various strengths and weaknesses of each state and territory's animal protection laws. We look primarily at criminal animal cruelty laws. We focus on both substantive prohibitions, meaning laws that prohibit you from doing certain things to animals, like cruelty, neglect, fighting, that kind of thing. And we also look at procedural laws that dictate what can be done to intervene in animal cruelty cases.
Okay, and so Mississippi was ranked 46th. Can you explain a little bit of why that is and how we stack up compared to other states?
Yeah, so Mississippi was ranked 46th out of the 50 states, which is in the bottom five. And Mississippi does have some decent laws when it comes to protecting dogs and cats, but unfortunately, those protections are not afforded to many other species, which is a big part of why they're ranked so lowly. Mississippi is also lacking some basic protections. For example, they're one of only 9 states that don't explicitly allow animals to be included in domestic violence protection orders.
Okay. And how does the legal framework for dogs and cats compare? Is that similar to what other states are doing?
The legal framework for dogs and cats is relatively similar to other states. For example, the Mississippi law permits courts to order possession bans after somebody has been convicted of cruelty to dogs or cats, which prevents them from owning or residing with an animal for a specific period of time. But many other states have that kind of protection for cruelty to any animal, not just dogs and cats.
And what kind of problem does it arises when it's just dogs and cats? What about other animals? What kind of issues does that bring up?
Yeah, I mean, we see cruelty perpetrated against all species. And so if when cruelty is perpetrated against a animal that's not a dog or cat, the laws that protect them are um, a lot thinner, a lot more vague, and don't have the same procedural safeguards. For example, the seizure law in Mississippi, it defines the word animal as dog, cats, certain equines, and exotic animals, which means that there's not an explicit law permitting seizure of other cruelly treated animals. And there aren't any provisions for those animals to be forfeited before trial, which is another really important issue.
And something that we've kind of seen recently on Facebook groups is people being concerned about animal abandonment. I'm not sure if that's in your
Mhm.
purview. Would you be able to speak a
Yeah,
little bit about Mississippi's animal abandonment laws and how we compare on
sure.
that?
Yeah, Mississippi actually doesn't have any laws explicitly addressing animal abandonment. There are some provisions around animal neglect that may apply depending on the situation, but it the laws don't explicitly address abandoning an animal.
And is that the same across other states as well, or is that
No, that's very unusual. Almost all states have laws criminalizing abandoning animals. Many of them will even specify that even if you're abandoning an animal at a shelter or veterinarian, you can still be held liable.
yeah, so we're speaking with one of the shelters in our area tomorrow, and he was telling me that someone abandoned a box of puppies in front of the shelter while they were closed, and they had unfortunately passed away in that time period that they were gone. And it just seems like there's something that could be done, but isn't being done. Is there any recommendation that your organization would have for legislators?
Yeah, I mean, we do produce model laws that we regularly work with legislators to implement throughout the country. Um, our report is also great because it highlights the states that are doing particularly well and can serve as models for Mississippi. Um, but yeah, animal abandonment, unfortunately, that kind of story we see all too often of animals being abandoned when shelters or vets are closed, and by the time they're found, it's too late.
And is there, let me think of how to phrase this. Is there a way that we can ensure it's being enforced as well? Because I feel like if we do introduce, let's say Mississippi introduces great legislation around animal abandonment, how would that be enforced? Because I would imagine you'd be able to catch these people abandoning animals, but if it's in the middle of nowhere where there's no cameras, it's kind of hard to enforce. Is there any examples of states who are able to enforce that?
Yeah, so there are a couple of different things that come to mind. For example, you know, we've ALDF has done reward offers in these types of cases where there is, an eyewitness or some kind of camera footage, asking the public for help identifying the people who are seen abandoning animals. Um, it's also a matter of funding animal protection positions, humane officers, law enforcement officers, and ensuring that they have the proper training on how to successfully navigate an animal cruelty investigation because it is so different from investigating other crimes. Um, and another thing that we uh, um, assist with and grade on our rankings is statewide animal cruelty prosecutors. So there are currently 4 states that have dedicated prosecutors whose job it is specifically to do animal cruelty crimes throughout the state. And so that is a great way to ensure that there are adequate resources, especially in rural areas where, counties might be strapped for these kinds of cases.
And on the topic of kind of animal control, I don't believe, and you might know this better than I do because I'm kind of just starting to look into this, but I don't believe every Mississippi county or local municipality has animal control. Is that something you're aware of in Mississippi?
Yeah, I don't know about Mississippi specifically, but that wouldn't surprise me. It often animal control functions fall to the local sheriff or kind of the de facto law enforcement body in rural areas, um, which can be difficult if those officers aren't um, specifically trained to investigate cruelty cases. And it can be really difficult in cases involving non-companion animals. So when you get into cases around farmed animals and wildlife, it's you can't take a herd of 100 cattle to your local shelter. So navigating those kinds of issues is another hurdle.
And you had brought up that the ALDF will help with, rewards. How does
Mhm.
public awareness play a role in stopping something like animal abandonment?
Yeah. So our reward offers, obviously, we want to get tips that are going to lead to the identification of individuals and make sure that they're held accountable. But we're also hoping to educate people generally about what is a crime and how this act, like leaving animals outside a closed shelter, can really harm and injure those animals.
And can you explain a little bit of how that does happen? So if the
How do you
public wanted
mean?
to know, because you were saying that you want the public to understand that this is a crime and these are
Mhm.
the effects. Can you explain what those effects are?
I mean, just in terms of the animals suffering and, potentially even dying as a result.
Okay. And in the topic of other animal control issues and just animal protection laws, what would you like to see Mississippi legislators do to attempt to address these issues?
Yeah. So I mentioned, animals are not included in possession bans. Another major gap in Mississippi's laws is its laws around sexual assault of animals. Right now, it's the detestable and abominable crime against nature. And that's incredibly vague and antiquated language. It's very difficult to enforce. And so we would like to see legislators tackle this issue. Often we run into issues because people just don't want to talk about that sexual assault of animals happens, but it does. And so our laws need to adequately spell it out and make sure that perpetrators can be held accountable.
And what's because this is new to me, what's the situation with that? Is it not, how is it held accountable if, let's say, they are able to prosecute some sort of whatever our laws, our antiquated law says, whatever that
Mhm.
phrasing is? What would the punishment be for something like that?
So it is a felony, but it's because it's so vague, it could very easily be challenged as unconstitutional. And actually, Mississippi's laws say with man or beast, so that's tied to unconstitutional and antiquated laws against sodomy. Um, so it's these kinds of outdated statutes are difficult to enforce and are open to constitutional challenges.
So it would be easy for a defense attorney to challenge that and say this doesn't apply.
Potentially, yes.
That is news to me. That is actually, I mean, what else is in Mississippi's laws that would need to be changed for it to be, I mean, not even in the top five, just run of the mill, 25 out of 50, like just run of the mill laws.
Um, well, for example, that search and seizure law, I would love for them to just remove the definition of animal that's there at the end, which limits it to certain species. That would mean that all species could be seized. It also provides a bond or forfeit statute, which means that the defendant has to either post a bond for the animal's cost of care or forfeit the animal. Um, and right now, that remedy is only available to cases involving dogs, cats, equines, exotic animals. Um, but that's an important remedial measure that should be available in all animal cruelty cases.
And is there a reason as to why this isn't happening in Mississippi? Is that something you guys are familiar with?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it comes down to how much lawmakers cling to a uh, provably false notion that protecting animals from egregious harm against humans is incompatible with Mississippi's other values. Animals are part of our communities and they're part of our families. So protecting animals' rights and lives is going to strengthen our communities and overall welfare.
And so right now, what are the values that would prevent Mississippi from taking action, especially with the sexual assault against animals? I'm kind of very surprised by that.
Yeah. So, for example, there's a couple of different issues. So, one of the broad values that we see competing against animal protection interests is the value in personal property because animals are legally considered property in all 50 states. And so, sometimes people will feel that they have the right to do whatever they want with their property. Um, but we want people to recognize that animals are sentient beings and they have inherent rights of their own to be free from cruel treatment. Specifically with sexual assault, we've seen a few different um, hurdles with passing that legislation. One major one is that people just don't want to acknowledge that it exists and don't want to talk about it. One is the fear of from agricultural industries that it's going to interfere with their artificial insemination practices, which are always explicitly carved out in these statutes. So that's not really an issue. Um, I will say that there were reports when Louisiana was updating its sexual assault laws of senators opposing it because they felt that um, removing sexual assault of animals from its unconstitutional sodomy law was against their Christian values. Again, those are the reports that were in the media.
Interesting. Well, is there anything else that you would like to include and tell the people of Mississippi what needs to change?
Yeah, I mean, I know that there are people working tirelessly on the ground in Mississippi to improve their laws. Um, and I would encourage them to just keep working at it and keep having hope. There have been improvements made. There laws regarding dogs and cats were implemented in 2011 and strengthened in 2020. So we are seeing incremental improvements. It's just going to take some time, and I just encourage people to keep fighting the good fight. And also, they can look at our report and our model laws that are available on our website for any ideas that they might have, or reach out to us at the Animal Legal Defense Fund. We're always happy to help.
All right. Well, I think that's all I need. If you have any closing thoughts, I mean, now's your time. I'll give you the stage.
No, I think we just about covered everything, but thank you.
Okay, perfect. Well, it was a pleasure meeting you. I really appreciate you taking some of your time to do this with me.
Yeah, anytime. It was good to meet you too.
All
Thank you.
right. Thank you. Have a good day.
You too. Bye.
Okay, bye.